SpaceX is ungrounded, Artemis 2 arrives, and the topic of the show, what can NASA do to assure access to space? All coming up on the next Orbital Edge. Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Orbital Edge News, a brand new show for passionate spaceflight fans. I am your host, Chad, and let's get straight into the space news. Now, SpaceX just did their return to flight on June 27th last night. There was a little bit of a delay to get the liftoff going, so sometime after midnight it finally went off. Did catch me off guard. I had to run outside to see this thing, and damn, this thing sounded awesome. It sounded like the studio was going to fall apart. So the next thing in space news is Astrobotics' upcoming Griffin lander is calling out to payload developers for their request to fly aboard the next moon landing attempt. We'll link down in the description where you can apply. And last in space news is the core stage of the Artemis 2 mission finally arrives at the Kennedy Space Center. This will mark the first notable piece of progress in getting the epic and historic mission off the ground. We're going to finally get to the main topic of the show. Is NASA to blame for the recent launch dry spell? How can we assure access to space? We want to provide a bit of context here for what will be the discussion of the show. The emerging issue is NASA hasn't launched anything for almost a month, with the exception of last night's launch, of course. New spaceflight fanatics crave and need launches. The recent grounding of SpaceX has made a few things very clear, and a few things we have warned you all about previously on the show. But let's talk about that. We've reached out to the space community and got their opinions, facts, and recommendations on how we can push our space program forward and not backwards. So, how are we going to prevent another issue like this in the future? Well, consider this. SpaceX has had years, if not a decade, to develop a redundant and competing launch vehicle that would have kept SpaceX rolling with its launch cadence. A 3-stage rocket would have been a fully capable launch vehicle as long as new engines would have been used and a widening of the core stage to around 5 meters. But SpaceX chose cheap, reliable, and 2 out of the 3 you can only pick 2. So with that said, we're going to move on the discussion here. This is going to come from JBS319 from Reddit. The whole problem right now is that Starliner is still on test. Falcon hasn't flown Cert 2 yet, and there are a limited amount of Atlas boosters, which has flown Cygnus before. Antares 330 isn't going to be ready for at least another year. New Glenn is still 2 months from its first flight, and other launch providers are still good ways from having their medium lift vehicles ready. Had this happened a year from now, we'd be fine. With the Falcon fully ramped up and New Glenn in operation, as well as a certified Starliner, instead we're in a weird limbo period in between legacy rockets like Delta and Atlas and next-gen rockets like Falcon and New Glenn, where the Falcon virtually is the only game in town, which makes this timing problematic. So, as long as that was, I do agree with everything there. It's just that the timing wasn't favorable here. But would this not have been a problem if SpaceX could have developed a 3-stage rocket and or completely a new 2-stage rocket to continue its launch cadence? Me thinks that could have been, that could have changed the course of history a little bit there. Now, the problem we have is all eggs are starting to come in one basket, and that is the Falcon 9. This is not good. A high launch cadence falls flat on its face. So, we also need to answer the question about what happens to all the customers' payloads. Sadly, most of these customers are locked into a contract. These contracts even say that they need to agree with the launch delays and indefinite timeframes. Now, how much money is wasted for waiting for SpaceX to launch their payloads? We ran a cost analysis of some ballpark ranges of monetary damages, and they come at a shocking $100,000 to $500,000 per day waiting on a government payload. It'd be way cheaper just to reintegrate onto another launch provider after just a few days of grounding. Finally, how much money can the customer potentially lose by a launch provider being grounded? A customer is projected to lose around $3 to $15 million per month on government payloads and about $1.5 million to $9 million per month on commercial satellites. These amounts, of course, are considering the cumulative efforts of delays on operations, schedules, and additional management overhead. So where does NASA figure into this? Well, they are not only a launch provider themselves, barely, but they're also the customer, and most notably SpaceX's customer. To be fair, NASA's budget from Congress has been in a down spiral over the last decade. NASA needs to desperately get back into the launch provider business, so we're not caught with their dick in our hands when SpaceX loses its perfect launch record. To be clear, we don't get political on the show. This is why we push for spaceflight at all costs, to push for humanity to not only have a permanent presence on the moon, but also to get humanity to Mars and beyond. We are not going to get there relying on private endeavors only. We're now seeing some of the failures of private-funded projects in droves. Failed moonlanders, test stand explosions, fuel leaks, and privately funded space stations that seem to have fallen off the planet. Give NASA the budget they need instead of being political, and we will start seeing progress in space. Well, that just about wraps it, so we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, comments from our last show. Welcome back. We'd like to thank all the subscribers and collaborators that help make this show very engaging. With that said, we're on Max Q, and before we actually dive into the first comment, I want to address the contraption behind me. I would consider this a studio upgrade. Let me know in the comments if it's cool, if it's something I should keep on the show, or if it's distracting. Just kind of, give me your thoughts on it. So with that out of the way, we're going to get into the first comment that it was about the last show, episode 6, where we were talking about the Starliner and Sonny and Butch being stuck up in there, and a little bit about the issues of Boeing behind this mission. So Alex H. from Twitter says this: I agree with your stance on the whole Starliner issue and how people on the internet are jumping to conclusions that a Crew Dragon can just be launched at will. This really shows the difference between experts in their field and people who need more education in space. Oh, absolutely, Alex. As space is hard, and we cannot stress enough that there has to be planning involved in these special circumstances. It makes the space community look bad when people can't perform any research. All the major news networks are interviewing top stakeholders in the mission, and they have said that the Soyuz or the Dragon are possibilities. As we said on the last show, the only way the Dragon can be launched to retrieve Sonny and Butch from the International Space Station is a 90-day window where there has to be prep, logistics, orbital alignment. And yet here we are on almost day 60. So that just means in 30 more days, it's a possibility that the Dragon can actually be launched. Will they repurpose Crew 9 to just go get Sonny and Butch down? Meaning they're going to have to actually cancel the existing Crew 9 from getting up there in the first place, and then just postpone their mission. Only time will tell on what actually happens there. So I'm really excited and curious to see what NASA decides to do. We have reached escape velocity, which means that completes the show. Before we go, the answer to the orbital trivia is Sputnik 1. If you enjoyed this episode, you can support us in the future by participating in our discussions on social media and on the show. We will see you next time.